Good afternoon. Today I'm going to walk you through how to get started testing an Angular application using Jasmine and Karma. So let's go ahead and get started. First we want to create a new Angular project. First you need to have Angular CLI installed. So what you want to do is npm install-g for global, and it would be at Angular/CLI, I believe. It should be installed already for mine. I think I've got Angular 11, whatever's latest, or almost latest. Okay, so it looks like 12. It looks like maybe it upgraded for me. Okay, hopefully nothing goes haywire here. And then you just want to create an ng new, and I'm going to create a new project called status page. The idea of this app, it already exists. Anyway, the idea of, let me go through this. I want to add Angular routing. I'm not going to use it yet. I'll just use CSS. All right, I'm going to delete the current version. Try again. ng new project is called status page. The idea is I want to get a bunch of statuses from services or application microservice dependencies and display it on a website. And let's walk through this. Yes, I want to add Angular routing. I'll just use CSS. And while that's installing packages, I'll explain. So Angular, or AngularJS, although they're different versions, AngularJS refers to the original Angular 1 code base from, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. And Angular is what they call the new framework, Angular 2 through 12 now. Angular is a JavaScript/TypeScript framework for building web user interfaces. And it creates components, it creates pipes, and uses templates and a router to handle all these things. So let's go ahead, we'll get started. We've got our Angular app. To start our app, we just type ng serve, and it's going to, first I need to cd to my status page application. ng serve will open up, it will start my server in development mode, and I'll go ahead and open a browser, and it's going to go to localhost 4200, and it looks like there's something wrong here. Let's see what's going on. Oh, it's still building, that's all. All right, and then you can see it load in the background. Now this just has some help information. Let's go ahead and look at what's going on in the background. I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm just going to open Visual Studio Code in my status page folder. So I type code dot because I have a shortcut to Visual Studio Code. And let's look at a few of these files. We've got our package.json, which has all of our Angular dependencies, Angular core, Angular router, which we included, all these other things. We have dev development dependencies, like our Angular CLI. That allowed us to type Angular new and ng serve. And then we have, for testing, we have Jasmine and Karma. And I'm going to show you today how to use Jasmine and Karma as well, although I don't know if we'll actually get to testing a component. All right, so there's a bunch of things in the package JSON. The README goes through a bunch of stuff. Essentially, you type ng serve to start the server on localhost port 4200, as we've just done here. ng test will initiate tests. ng build will compile our TypeScript. Now, Angular uses TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript which adds typing, like string and object types, other things. So you can use a safer typing, not typing keyboard, but object type for object-oriented programming with JavaScript. We're not actually going to get anything, have anything to do with TypeScript today. We'll use plain JavaScript. In fact, we won't even use JavaScript classes. We're going to use an object literal and test that. All right. So ng serve, ng build, ng test, ng E2E runs end-to-end tests. These are It uses protractor, which uses WebDriver, which actually drives the browser. We won't get into that today either, but we may as well later. Our goal today is to create a component, a very basic component. We're just going to create a toggle switch that can keep track of its state on and off and display whether it's on or off, much like a radio button or a checkbox or something like that. I'm not even sure how we'll make it look. We might start off with just the word on and off. Anyway, so there's our package JSON, our README, our tsconfig, and our Angular JSON, as well as Karma config. We're not going to look at any of these other things today. But we are going to look in the source folder. So we have source, app, and under our app is where we're going to build our components. So we've got, let's take a look at our first app component, right? Our app component, well, we import component. For those of you like me who learned the old way, equals require, right? Whatever, Angular core component. Import is the newish way of importing components for ES6, ES 2015 and beyond. And TypeScript has a transform which allows you to do that, like BabelScript. All right, let's take a look at what we've got here. We're importing component, and then we have this decorator called component, right? This decorator, this at component, well, let's take a look at it. It's actually a function. That's where you see the parentheses, and it's passing in an object to this component function that we've got here. The Angular compiler knows that this decorator will then decorate our app component class. When we unit test a task, when we unit test a class, we want to make sure that that we're testing just it. We'll also learn later how you can use the Angular test bed to inject values and all that. That'll all come later. Right now, we want to concentrate on A, learning how to draw a simple component, B, have some state in that component that we can display, and then C, how we can use the test runner, the Karma test runner, and the Jasmine test syntax for writing a simple test. Our component is, see, it has nothing here. You can ignore all of this stuff here, and we have a class that has a single value of title, this single property, and that's status page, right? So let's go ahead and look at the app component template. It has this template URL with the selector of app root and a styles URL. We see here we've got our app component.html. It has a lot of stuff. All of this is used for rendering all of this. So I'm going to take all of this, except for the router outlet, and I'm going to obliterate it. Let me see if it actually has. Okay, there we go, status page app. So I want to find just that one part here. Well, that's dynamic. I want to look for is running. All right, so I'm only going to keep. Well, let's go ahead and keep that whole highlight card, just to make it a little fancy. Actually, we're going to lose all of its style as well because we're going to kill all this style. What do we got? Highlight card. So we've essentially got this div. Right. No, yeah, we need to close this div. I'm probably just going to end up throwing the whole thing away. But okay, so we've got this background, this swoosh, and we've got our highlight card. I don't see the rocket there. Yep, it's all going away. There we go. Status page app is running. That's all we've got. Okay, so I just wanted to show you a template, and we can actually remove our router outlet as well. Here's our template. We've got a span. Let's make it a div, just for consistency, right? And it just has title app is running. So app is running is solid text, and title, well, title comes from my component, right? If I change this, so I maybe call this my status page. This app component has a property of title. We can refer to those properties using these mustache curly brackets. Mustache being a template framework. But the two curly braces will reveal the properties for my app component. And so it changed to my status page. I can go to my component and I can add another property. I can call it author, and I'll put my own name here. So I have author is Aaron Evans. Now you saw this reloaded in the background, or maybe you didn't see that, but it still looks the same. Let's go into our template, and then we can do div created by, and then we can add author as a template there. And then I'm going to hit Control S to save. It reloads, and then it just adds this created by Aaron Evans. So we've got some properties that are hard coded in our component, and then they're dynamically loaded in the template. So you can already see what happens if I can add another property called page loads equals 0. All right, and then what I want to do, well, actually, let's do get page loads. We're going to make this a function. Get must return a value. Yeah. I'm just going to call it count, I guess. All right, so I create count equals 0. Uh-oh, I've got a problem. Get page loads. All right, maybe I don't want to jump too far into this. Does it even give me a hint? A constructor, I've got a typo in here somewhere, I'm sure. And you guys are probably laughing at me. Get page loads. Oh, huh. No. Oh, huh. There we go. I wasn't returning. That's all it was. I'm an idiot. All right. So now I can get my page loads same way. Create another div. Just call it page loads, and we will get the count. And we got 0. And it's not incrementing it. Okay. Oh, return this dot count. All right, we're going to wipe all that out, and I got sidetracked on something here, and I don't know why. Let's go ahead and pause. Are we rolling again? All right, so I've abandoned the idea of keeping track of page loads for right now. Got sidetracked there, and I don't know what I was doing wrong. So it just wasn't getting the state. It wasn't actually keeping any state in my component. So let's go back and look at how to create a new component, right? So we've got this, our app component, and you can see that is registered in our app module. It's added to the module by importing our app component from this app.component.ts, and then our ng module decorator. You can see it creates the app module and it decorates it, passing again this object literal, and it's importing the browser module, the app routing module, and bootstrapping our app component that we've declared. So what we want to do, we want to create a new component and embed it on our page. First, let's take a look. App component is really no different than any other component. So app component, you can see it has this selector app root. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from our index.html. We have this app root pseudo HTML tag, this custom tag that was added. So Angular compiles our index.html as well, and it has this app root object. So we're going to, inside our app component HTML, we're going to create a new component, and we're going to call it ToggleSwitch, like so. Now you'll see we get failed to compile. That's because there is no ToggleSwitch component, right? Let's go ahead and create one. So I'm going to hop over and use my Angular CLI. If you remember, I installed Angular CLI. Oh, this is my my console output from the ng serve. What I want to do in my same size picture, I want to do ng generate component, and let's call it let's call it ToggleSwitch, actually, without a dash in it. So what it's going to do is it's going to generate a few files, like it creates a ToggleSwitch component.ts, a TypeScript file. It creates a spec, that's a test file. We'll look at that in a moment. And it creates a HTML template and a CSS file, which is empty. So we're going to change this to ToggleSwitch here, so that it's correctly working. Still says fails to compile. What does our error message tell us? Template URL app component.html. All right. Okay, so I wanted to show you our ng generate component created this ToggleSwitch folder that has our files. It has our ToggleSwitch component. It implements on init. This is the ng on init function where you can load things as you load your component. And it has a template and a style URL. Oh, here's why. App ToggleSwitch is the selector, or at least this is one reason. There we go. It looks like our app is a little bit happier. And let's go ahead and see. We can see ToggleSwitch works. Why does it say ToggleSwitch works? Well, that's what our template, our ToggleSwitch component. What is going on here? I'm diffing something. All right. So let's go back to our ToggleSwitch component. Again, it's just a class, just like app component or app component.ts. You can see this one doesn't have implements on init. It is our base object. So we've got our app component. We've got our ToggleSwitch component. Same thing, selector, template, style. And it has an empty constructor and an on init, which looks a little different from our app component. We don't see any constructor or any ng init or on init here. And this one has a bunch. Okay, our app component doesn't have any CSS. Our ToggleSwitch doesn't have any CSS as well. Let's look at our ToggleSwitch component template. So we can say this is a ToggleSwitch. And we can also say it is off for now. And what we can do is we'll again change this to a div. We're going to create a wrapper div, and we'll call this class. Give it a class, and we'll call it ToggleSwitch. And we're going to give it an H1 heading. And it is off. Now we can go ahead, and you can see we added some style here. Let's go back into our ToggleSwitch CSS, and then we can do .ToggleSwitch. And let's give this, let's start with a border, right? I always love a good border. So we now have a border around our ToggleSwitch, which is this whole div. Perhaps we don't want it to be a div, now that I think of it, like that. We'll create it as a span. And let's actually just make this a label. Label. And here we'll have a nested span. It is off. No. All right, now let's go ahead and give this some other things, and we'll call this class equals status. And then in our CSS, we can say, I'm already wishing I was using Sass. We'll set our ToggleSwitch label. We'll make this font size 200%. We'll give it some padding. Let's do this. All right, that's not looking good. Here. The joys of CSS. I'm not a CSS expert, as you can see. So let's make this a P. So we'll force some. Wow, that's really border fun. All right. Oh, that's why. Because we started with a div instead of span. Okay. And then what we want to do is we want to do this display inline block. All right. No. There we go. Wait a second. It looks like it just takes a little while to do it, and then what we'll do is, well, we've got a border. We need to make that border thicker. And let's put our padding here. All right, and then we've got our label. Now let's remove that from there. Let's make that relative. Let's go. Oh, I changed that from being a label, didn't I? Again, I'm playing with too much here. There we go. And then we will make our label display in line block 2. Maybe we just want it to be blocked. I just want it as a, there we go. This is a toggle switch. It is off. The worst design ever, and it took the most amount of time ever to do it. And we can do toggle switch dot status, right? And we'll just make it red for now. Okay. I'm happy with my beautiful artwork. How about you? Hire me as a CSS designer, and you will be fired. All right, so we haven't really done anything yet, right? So we've worked with our template, this toggle switch component template. We've worked with our CSS. Let's take a look at our spec. All right. So the first thing you can see is we're importing some things from Angular core testing, component fixture and test bed. We're also importing toggle switch component. And then this is Jasmine syntax, describe some comment, and then it takes a callback function. All of this is a callback function from the describe. We can just as easily move this out and we can do, and we can call it tests. No, we can't. Maybe because it's not hoisted. Yeah, that was all. So anyway, it's just a callback function. That's all I wanted to illustrate. So we'll go back to here, move everything back to the way it originally looked. So it calls before each, and as you may expect, before each is a function. It's asynchronous. In this case, it doesn't have to be, but it's an asynchronous function here that happens before each test method. A test method here is this it should create. Again, it starts with a comment, and then it takes another callback function here. And it says expect component to be truthy. What this is just saying is we want a component to this. So we want component to be of type. This is the TypeScript. You see we're declaring with let a variable named component of type ToggleSwitch component. So if you come from a C, Java, C#, that would be like saying ToggleSwitch component equals new toggle switch component. Right, something like that. Oh, well, it's just declaring it. So it's declaring component to be of type toggle switch component. And it's saying declare a fixture of component fixture with this type as toggle switch component. So a generic component fixture of type toggle switch component. And then before each, it configures the testing module. You can see declarations. It says we need a toggle switch component. If I had more than one thing, I would add them to this list. And then it calls compile components. So test bed, configure, testing module, and then dot. So configure testing module returns an object that we can then call compile components on. Likewise, this before each. So this is the asynchronous before each. This is the synchronous before each. It calls test bed create component. So we're creating a toggle switch component. We're creating new toggle switch component here, or object.create. And we're saying component, this component up here, is going to be the fixture.component instance. So you could think of this in a different way, that it's saying fixture equals, right? So test bed create component is going to return a fixture. I didn't mean to delve into that right there. So we're getting a fixture, and we're doing fixture component instance equals new toggle switch component. Something like that. That's all that's doing. And then we're assigning this, so we don't just have to say fixture.component instance every time. We can just refer to it as component. This is just giving a variable to alias this. And then it calls fixture detect changes. It does this every time. It's a way that the test bed can detect changes to a component and rerun. And then all we're doing is call it should create component, and it's saying, hey, component, it shouldn't be null, it shouldn't be undefined, it shouldn't be false. That's what truthy means with the truthiness factor. So let's see. I'm going to try and get back to initial state. Yeah. All right. So this is our toggle switch component. And now we're going to take a step back, and right, I've kind of given you a whole lot to delve into with a couple of sidetracks with that page load counter that I didn't want to figure out how to implement, and this this beautiful HTML template of the toggle switch. So let's step back and let's implement a toggle as a pure component, right? Give me just a second here. Right, so what do we want to do? We want to, let's do some test-driven development. So I'm going to, I don't need to look at all of my node modules. So I'm going to close that node modules folder. I'm going to go to source app, and I'm going to create my first Jasmine test and run it with Karma separately. So for under app, I'm going to create a new file, and we're just going to back up, and we're going to call it simple test.spec.ts. Now the .spec is important. .spec.ts. This is just what Karma and Jasmine are going to filter on. So we can see, we start here. Now we just do describe. Right, call it my first test. We're going to create a callback function. And then we're going to say it should succeed. It also takes a callback function. And what we want to do is we just want to say, not assert, expect true to be true. Should be no problem here. And then what we can do is we can hop over to our command line, and over here I'm just going to type ng, not ng test. Well, yeah, I'll just type ng test. You can also type npm test. So looking here at our package JSON, right? We've got scripts in our package JSON. npm test just calls ng test, just like npm start calls ng serve. npm build would call ng build. So let's see how we're doing here. ng test, okay, so it's still building. And it's going to launch another browser. And this is going to be Karma. Karma is the test runner that runs in the browser. Jasmine is the test framework that we're writing our tests in. So this simple spec, this is Jasmine. And then Karma will actually launch and run in the browser. We technically don't need a browser, and you can use other frameworks. You can use Jasmine by itself to run tests. Or you can use Mocha instead of Jasmine, or you can use Jest instead of Karma. Now, Karma runs in the browser. It uses WebDriver to launch the browser. And Jest uses something called JS DOM. It's a fake browser implemented in JavaScript. And the reason you might use Jest instead of Karma to run your tests is so that they can run a little faster, and so that you can run them on a continuous integration server that doesn't have a browser. So it uses JS DOM to simulate the browser. It essentially is a DOM with a JS implementation, so you can manipulate the DOM and so forth. All right, so let's look. We've got some errors here. And what happens is my dinking around with the app component. It says it should render the title. So let's look at our app component spec. Now it should have title as status page. Oh, and first of all, I changed it to my status page. So let's see if this will take care of one of our errors. Make our comments as well. That should get rid of one of our errors. Okay, we still have one failure. Now this other failure is, well, we've changed the location of our status page object. Oh, here's what's going on. I've been wondering earlier why I wasn't seeing stuff properly in Visual Studio Code. So it should, well, first of all, status page app is running. We can, well, we want to render the title. So first we need to change this to my status page app instead of just status page. Right, because our app component is called my status page. I can change that back to status page, and I think I'll want to do that long term. So I'm going to change that back to status page. We're going to go back to our spec. Now that's going to fail again. So let's go back here, status page. But what we're doing is we're doing expect compiled query selector content span. Now we don't have a dot content and we don't have a dot span here, right? In our, well, let's look at our index.html. I think we do have a dot content. Nope, we just have our app root. So looking at our thing, we want to see that our first one, we'll call this title. So now we want to see that we have a div called title. So not our simple test, we were still working on our app component spec. So we don't want to use compiled query selector. We want to use compiled.css selector. Well, we'll keep this out. We've just got, I'm going to modify my component, right? I'm going to make a div ID, we'll make a class equals app component. So what I'm doing is I'm wrapping it in this element here. So I've got a div called app component, or a div of class app component with a class called title. So now we can say app component title contains status page app is running. All right, cannot read property text content of null on our app component spec line 33. Typo. App component. We may have made our test pass. Okay, yay. All right, so it should create the ToggleSwitch component, and we've got my first test. So we can now leave our app component tests alone. We can leave our ToggleSwitch components. I just want to focus on my first test. My first test should succeed. Right? Okay, so let's go back to our simple test spec. Now let's change this to expect true to be false. We'll save that. Jasmine will dynamically reload, and now we have one test failing. What's failing? Expected true to be false. My first test should succeed. Okay, good. It's always good to check that your tests are failing, or that your tests can fail. In this case, it's a no-brainer. It can fail. And with me at the helm, your tests will fail. Okay, so this is our first simple test. Now, we can do some cool things in here, right? We can let's actually change this to make it more of a test, right? So let's let status equal true, right? So expect status to be true. And then we can do like this, console log status, to actually see what's going on. And I can actually bring up my DevTools console, and I can see status is true down here. ToggleSwitch is not a known element. If ToggleSwitch is an Angular component, all right, we've got some problems here. It doesn't like my ToggleSwitch anymore. And this may be in here. So let's eliminate that variable. Let's rerun this. We just want to get rid of extra noise. All right, so status is true. What's happening is it's trying to render the app component with the ToggleSwitch component. So we just get this deprecation warning. I don't care about this. I don't know about this. This is in Zone.js, which is used for detecting state changes in Angular. But we've got our status true in the console. So we can debug our tests in Karma by adding console log statements, is what I want to show. So expect status to be true. So if my status is 1 plus 1 is equal to 3, we'll see we've got one failure, expected false to be true. Our status is false. Well, then we look, oh, well, 1 plus 1 is not equal to 3, it's equal to 2. And now we've got a passing test, and we're displaying the toggle switch. What? But we're not displaying our app component. All right, so let's take a step back, and what I want to do is I want to actually remove my toggle switch, and I don't remember how to do that because we can recreate it later. What I want to do is I want to focus on, I'm going to save that my first test. I'm going to create a test for ToggleSwitch before implementing ToggleSwitch. So what I'm going to do, yeah, I don't have anything worth saving in ToggleSwitch, so I'm going to delete it. And I'm not sure how to do that. ng remove component CLI. So I'm asking Google, how do I properly delete components? So delete the folder, add the module. All right, so there's not an easy way. ng destroy component toggle switch. All right, yeah. All right, so that was a bit of a pipe dream anyway. I know what to do, at least in this case. So I'm going to delete this toggle switch folder. And now we're going to run into trouble. Our component's not going to work anymore because it has that toggle switch component. So what I need to do is I need to go into my app component HTML. Well, I've already removed the toggle switch from there, but I hadn't saved it. And then I need to go into my app module, and I need to remove this from here. Remove the import, remove the declaration, and then we should be good. Okay, I've got a status page app is running. It's created by Aaron Evans. All right, we're good here. So now I've successfully obliterated my toggle switch. I'm going to recreate it from scratch, and I'm going to do a better job, I hope, than I did with that CSS. All right, so I'm going to start off by, I'm going to create a new folder, right, and call it I'll start with just calling it ToggleSwitch. And I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it ToggleSwitch spec.ts. And then I should be able to bring up Karma runner here, and didn't find it. Oh, that's because I don't have anything here. So I want to describe ToggleSwitch. Create my function, and it should have a status. And this is a function. What is our status? So we want to create a variable. Let toggle switch equal, we'll just create an object, right? And it's going to have a status. Let's call it a state. And we'll just, we're going to call it false. Go to our tests. Reload our test runner, see if we can detect that. There we go. Spec has no expectations. Should have a state. Oh, that's saying it should have a state. So we want to expect toggle switch to toggle switch dot state to equal false. There we go. All right, so we've got our first test. It'll show up here eventually, perhaps. toggle switch should have a state. Well, we don't even want we just want to say to be truthy, right? To exist. So like I said, to be truthy, it's not null, it's not undefined, it's not false. It might also be not zero or not empty string. Expect false to be truthy. Here's a good question. How to check if JavaScript object has property in Jasmine. Okay, we could check keys. All right, so it's not an easy thing. So we can say 2 equal false. And that'll pass. Maybe. All right, so let's talk about our toggle switch component. We need to have a state, right? It's like a light switch. It's going to have a state on or a state off, essentially. So let's go ahead and define our component, right? We're going to create a const, and we're going to call it toggle switch. And it's just going to be an object literal, right? So it should exist. So in here, we, well, let's use let. We're going to do object.create on this toggle switch. So we're going to create an instance. It's kind of like cloning it, right? And then what we want to do is we want to say that my switch or expect switch to be truthy. All right, so we're defining our component here, right? And we can actually new file. We can do export and we can refactor that out of our test. I'm going to get this wrong. Here, I'll do it this way. Const toggle switch equals object, and we're going to give it a, we're going to jump ahead here. State equals here. We'll change it to on equals false. So we've got an object with a property called on, and then we can say export default toggle switch, and then I'm hazy on this whole export thing. Okay, so we're good, right? Oh, what happened is I missed my describe, right? Describe ToggleSwitch. I'm terrible with quotes and consistency. All right, ToggleSwitch should exist. All right, and then we can go ahead and I'm going to create another test here. It should have property on. And I'm going to move this out, so I'm going to say let, I'm going to change this to toggle. And then I'm going to do before each. Before each takes a callback function. And I'm going to say toggle equals object. Dot create toggle switch. Now, expect toggle to be truthy. So it's giving me a warning. I can actually tell it that it's a type toggle switch. Because there isn't a type, it's just a U problems quick fix variable toggle implicitly has type any. So it wants me to call it any. That's a warning, really. But VS Code is being picky about it. All right, so it should exist. It should have a property called on, right? So what is on? I don't like on. It's kind of ugly. Let's change this to status again. So expect toggle.status to not to be undefined. There we go. That's how I want to express that. Come on, Karma, you can reload. Maybe it can't. Oh, it probably did. And I can actually inspect here, remember. I can console.log, and this is my toggle. Often what you'll do when you're writing a unit test, you'll call this system under test, like SUT, system under test, or whatever. But I like it to be a little clearer in the object type. That just indicates what it is. So toggle switch should exist, succeeds. Toggle switch should have a property called on. And you can see here, I don't know where this is coming from anymore. Oh, that's from my first test. And toggle, well, it doesn't have a property. Oh, but the prototype of it has a property of status is false, right? Well, let's verify that then. It should have default status of false. We need to create our callback function. And then what we want to say, expect toggle status to equal. Now I could say to be falsy, right? Or to be false. I want to say to equal false. Be a little more explicit that we're doing an equals comparison on here. And we're being pretty explicit here, right? We don't necessarily need to check that this object exists, but we've got here have default value of false. Now what we want to do, let's talk about how we're going to toggle this, right? Well, let's create a function within our object literal, and we're not going to keep this in object literal. I'm just doing this so that we can so that we can understand it from the most basic level of what our component is going to do, right? Our toggle switch. So we want to have, we want to be able to flip the toggle, create that as a function, and we can actually fit this all in one line. What we want to do is we want to say this dot status equals not this dot status, right? So we're just flipping the bit here. And this is probably our first interesting test, right? By the way, I'm a firm believer in semicolons. I'm just not a firm practitioner of them. So let's describe this. It is test driven. It's not test first. I'm writing it, and now I'm writing a test before I go on to anything. So it should change status when you flip it. Let me think of it. It should flip status from false to true. Yeah. Had to look at my notes. I like halfway implemented this earlier, and then said, well, I should record that. So, okay. Now what we want to do is we want to be aware that our toggle, we're going to follow this principle, right? We're going to do arrange. We're going to do our setup toggle dot status. We're going to explicitly set it to false, even though we know it's false by default. But say I do something that breaks the default status, then that'll fail this test, but it would also fail this test if this test you're about to see. So I'm going to do arrange. I'm going to set up, and I'm going to act. There's these three acts to a play: arrange, set up, what happens before you actually test. Now I'm going to actually do something with my toggle switch. None of my other tests actually do anything. They just want to make sure it exists, make sure it has a property called status, make sure that status is by default false. So what I want to do is I want to call toggle flip. That's my action. And then I want to assert. So 3 A's: arrange, act, assert. I want to do toggle dot, I want to do expect. Again, expect is an assertion in Jasmine. One way of doing it. Expect toggle status. Well, I flipped my toggle. It should be true, right? Well, let's first, we're copying this exactly, and I'll paste it to make sure that I didn't mistype it. And now it should fail, right? It should be true after I flip it. So we're going to see if this works. Wow, Jasmine's slow. Oh, it's my computer slow. I think when it gets hot, this Mac slows down. Yesterday it was really hot and it was fierce. So okay, expected true to equal false. So we can go back and we correct this, right? And now we have our first truly interesting test. We're testing that flip, this function on our toggle, that it changed the status. We're testing that a function changes the state of our object, and it's now succeeding as well. And we can actually look at this here too, right? We can actually look at our toggle at the start. We can then look at it after we call the flip function. We're going to flip our switch, and we're going to look at our console log. And let's say before flipping the switch, we'll just call it before flip, and then toggle after flip. Okay, before flip, status is false, cool, and after flip, status is true. Awesome. All right, what else do we need to test? Well, we verified that it's flipping from false to true because we know our implementation, and we're pretty confident, but our implementation might not always be the same. For instance, maybe we want to keep track of how many times the switch is flipped. So let's do that. Every time we flip the switch, let's save this in a variable. We'll call it count, and we'll start with 0. And then we'll just do this dot count plus plus. Now we're at the point we probably want to break this function up into multiple lines. So we're increasing our count. So now we have a toggle switch. It keeps track of its state, whether it's on or off, and it has a count. So again, not test first, but test driven, because I just wrote 2 lines of code. Let's go back and write a test to make sure. So it should flip status from false to true. It should keep track of how many times it's flipped. There we go. Create our callback function. All right. So what do we want? We want to do. Well, we don't need to actually set the status at the beginning of this one. Well, let's go ahead. Let's toggle status equals false, and then we want to do toggle here. I'm going to break things up here. This isn't the best thing, but this is a multi-step scenario. So we want to expect toggle count to equal 0, right? Let's see if this succeeds. Should keep track of how many times it's flips. Okay, so that's cool still. Now, what I want to do is I want to toggle.flip. So I'm flipping the switch, and now we should have a failing test, right? Our total should be 1. So I want to keep track of multiple states in this test, which may not be the best idea. I saw red. If it will ever render correctly, then we'll see. Okay. Yeah, we read should keep track of how many times expected 1 to equal 0. So let's go back. What we want to do is we want to check our initial state. Then we want to change it. And then we want to expect toggle count to equal 1. Let's see if that works. And we can go ahead and we can add that there. So we're going to add that before our expectation because it might fail. Right, so we've kind of got 2 states. We're checking the count starts at 0, then we're checking the count is 1. And then I'm going to flip it at least 1 more time. Then I want to make sure that, so it should go 0, 1, 2, right? It's incrementing our counter each time. And now that we're looking at this, we could see there might be some alternate implementation. So if someone changes this code, I don't know, right? If someone changes this code to, I can't think of a good example right now. So this is maybe still really simple. But it's still succeeding, and we can see, okay, so these are our first ones. Let's eliminate those other messages here. And let's go to our simple test and remove that as well. Just so we get a clean console. Okay, it loads up, and we're going to see just the results from our single test. in the console. Again, Jasmine is the test framework that allows us to write our tests. Karma is the test runner that executes our tests in the browser and displays our results in the browser. Looks like I've got something happening somewhere else as well. I think that's going to trigger another build. But we can see before the flip, we had a count of 2. And after the flip, we had a count of 2. All right, so something's going on in... Let's look at my spec. Toggle before, any flip after first flip. Oh, here's this initial toggle. And this should be status, not on. All right, so you can see here, even this simple object, which, I don't know, it has a status that can change, it has a count that increments, and it has a function that modifies both of those. So it's actually, while it is a simple class, it's not actually that simple, and we've got quite a few tests. What other tests can we do, actually? Well, it has a default status of false, it flips status from false to true. We could see maybe this didn't work, right? Maybe we say this status equals true. And I think all of our tests will still pass if I change that. Yep, every single test passes. So it can only flip the status once, theoretically. So I want to create a test that says it should flip status from true to false. All right, so I'm going to start with toggle status equals true. And I'm going to toggle dot flip status. And then I'm going to expect toggle status to be false, right? That makes sense. We start with our status at true. We flip our status from true to false. And so now our status should be false. But because my implementation is wrong, my implementation assumes that you're only going to want to flip it once. So that fails. So let's go ahead and change this back here. And see if we're working. All right. Now we're good because our logic is correct and it can flip multiple times. What if we change this test here? So how many times is it? Let's start with true. Is it still going to succeed? All right, it did still succeed. Well, that's okay because we're just counting, right? But if we had expect toggle status, right, to change each time. So let's not worry about that. We could also throw into this here expect toggle count to equal 1. But that's not really necessary, right? We want to keep things isolated and test only one thing at a time in a test. This one is a little different, right? This is changing our state multiple times. So this is kind of an ugly test. It's still a unit test. But there's some other things we could check here. For instance, let's check and make sure, and I can tell from this implementation with this object literal as just passing a constant in, that I think I can break it. It should should keep the state independent. Should have independent state for each toggle. Now, in this case, this is again getting into a little bit more complexity. In this test, we can't use our toggle that's set up at the beginning. Well, we could, but we want to test this a little different. So what we want to do is we want to let A equal let B equals object dot create toggle switch, right? A to or not dot to be B to start off. These are independent objects, right? Have independent state for each toggle. Okay, right. And this is one thing that could be happening. So we want to expect. Here, let's do this. Let's do A dot flip, and then expect A dot status to equal true, right? And expect B dot status to equal false. In other words, B didn't change, A did change. That's all good. So we should have independent state here, but I think I know a dirty trick, right? What if I do let T equal toggle switch, our base object, and I do T dot flip. What's happening is I'm referencing my base object, and this is a real world scenario, especially in JavaScript land. Expect true to equal false. And where is this failing? On should keep track of how many times it's flipped. Oh, because it broke this. This broke the other test as well. All right. So calling t.flip on our base object literal breaks the test because B status is changed. And you can see here this other test with the count. It messes with the count. Let's do that again and look at the error. So this is a real concern, right? This happens all the time in JavaScript projects where someone has an object literal or they're cloning, creating instances of objects, and they're not sure what they're doing. Or you're using a prototype in a way it shouldn't. So this is a really good test. And now it's failing with the default state of what? Oh, because it switches. All right, so what can we do to make this all work? Well, we can use a constructor function or a class, right? So we're going to do that. What we're going to do is instead of a constant, we're going to implement this as a class, right? Class toggle switch. And then what we want to do is we'll create a constructor. And we're going to set this dot count and this dot status we're doing a major refactor here. Property count. Oh, this is a TypeScript thing, so I can do count, and I can even specify that it's a number. That's a TypeScript thing, and then I can do status, and what is it? Boolean. I don't know TypeScript myself. I don't know if it's capitalized or lowercase. Yeah, so lowercase for number and Boolean. That's the default or the standard. So I've got these two properties. I don't know if I need to create getters. Just rearrange that. I don't need to declare it as a function. Right. So let's see what happens. Are we breaking this anything? Okay. Well, then we need to do new toggle switch instead of object create, right? So we're refactoring our code. Got some extra parentheses here. And then we've got to go up here for here. We'll do toggle equals new toggle switch. Let's kill that. And I think all of our tests are going to pass, but knowing myself, they probably won't. Ah, they all passed. So I successfully, and coincidentally, and we want to also make sure here at the end that A and B still have their same status after RT, which of course, now this test doesn't make sense. But what we've essentially done is we have refactored our toggle switch to create a class, and there was a lot of opportunity just in terms of making typos here. But I successfully did, and now I have, just with a simple bit of refactoring in my code to use new and object create. Now we're not creating any havoc. We now get a compiler error. Type of toggle switch is not called. So this is the intro. I'm going to wrap up for now, and then what I'll do following up is I'm going to take this basic class and I'm going to turn it into a component that will then render, and hopefully it'll render more beautifully than that ugly HTML box that I did before. But the idea is that I've created the functionality for a toggle switch, and the idea is being that every time you flip the toggle, you move the bit back and forth, whether it is through a programmatic action like a server call, a report sets the servers down, and it will toggle that server to be marked as down or unavailable instead of running or available. Or it can be a switch with user interaction that you can actually toggle the switch just like a checkbox or a radio button, that you can toggle it manually and it will change the state and it will keep track of the count. So that'll be our next one. We'll delve into how to implement the toggle switch component in Angular as a UI component. But I just wanted to really introduce you to the basics of Angular. I know I got sidetracked a bit early on with my ugly CSS and HTML, as well as with just cleaning up the app component. But anyway, I'm going to do a follow-up lesson that will show you how to write an Angular component that has this behavior, and it's going to look very similar to this behavior, and then write unit tests for that individual component, and then write an integration test that can both test the component and test its behavior in the DOM in an isolated way. And that's similar to how the Angular test bed create component. not similar, testbed create component allows us to create a component and to then inspect the DOM here, like you see on the line 33 of the app component spec. We can inspect the DOM in an isolated way without having to load up the whole app in there. And that's this testbed create component, creates the fixture, fixture detects changes, and then it gets the element that's this compiled. And so the compiled component as opposed to the whole page. All right, so hope that was useful. I'd love your feedback and comments, and we'll see you later.